Welcome to Injector Confidential, a podcast by injectors for injectors. I'm Nicole.
I'm Kristen, and we have a super awesome episode for you this week. We are talking all about imposter syndrome.
And we are doing it from remotely. We're usually in the same place, but life, tis
Yeah.
life, gets in the way. And honestly, I was thinking to myself and laughing. I was like, Kristen and I are probably going to be so much more on task and productive when we're not in the same place, being distracted by cute animals and uh,
True.
it's true. It's not as fun, but it is more professional. I truly feel like a real podcaster.
Look at
And
us. Look at us
no
go.
imposter syndrome here, man.
That's right, baby.
That is
Love
right.
it.
So when we were researching for this episode, it went a little bit of a different direction than I thought it was going to, but I'm really excited about it. And I think Kristen feels the same way. My understanding of imposter syndrome really changed in the way that I think about it and the way that I had felt like I had felt it most of my career. And it's really reframed it, and I feel a lot more empowered.
Oh, wait. I'm curious. Do you want to share a little bit about what you thought imposter syndrome was, or would that fit in better later?
Oh, yeah. I'll definitely share. Thank you, my therapist, Kristen, always inviting me into the conversation. Okay, so I would say that I thought imposter syndrome was just straight up feeling like you weren't good enough in general. And I felt like that was just saying, I'm not good enough at XYZ thing objectively in a measuring standpoint. Like, I'm not good enough, for example. There's no way that I could work on my own. I don't have enough patience. Like, that's what I thought it was. But really, when it comes down to it, it's this pervasive feeling of self-doubt. And I think that I can really recognize that feeling and how it spills over into other areas of your life. And really, it just hit home with especially being a healthcare worker and how disproportionately healthcare workers are affected, and especially women. It's a cool thing that we're united by grief in a way that there's so much of this, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I did not realize that like how much imposter syndrome specifically affects women and minorities more than just men. And I guess actually if you look statistically, they affect men about the same, but it's when you look at like courses or you look at coaching, there's almost always a like section on imposter syndrome for women, but those that same thing isn't being addressed with men. And I think it's because women are expected to have imposter syndrome. And so it's going to just be interesting to talk about that. We're going to talk about it broadly, and then we're going to go into more specifically like how that can affect your aesthetic career and how to get past some of that.
And I think that it's so nice to know that, you're not alone in any of this, but especially with imposter syndrome, I think that it affects a lot more people a lot more deeply than I think people are willing to admit, and women tend to suffer in silence. So hopefully we're able to shed a little bit of light and help people feel a little bit more recognized, see where it comes from. I know for a fact with my own anxiety that if I understand the root of something, it really helps me dispel my anxiety a little bit about that. So I think that that's also why this research was helpful. I know Kristen listened to a great podcast episode from her bitch, Brene Brown. So
Uh, Queen bee, baby.
if you had to choose between Glennon Doyle and Brene Brown, who would you choose? Who would be the first pick for your dodgeball team?
Brene Brown. I love Glennon, and I be
She's
her
the
right.
underdog.
Yeah, but I love me like I love the research that Brene has, and there's
That's
just
true.
she's so funny. I will say Glennon like grates on me a little bit every now and then, and I'm like her biggest fan. But
It's okay. I
Brene
like the honesty.
Renee can do no wrong. I love Abby. If I could have Glennon and Abby, I'd be team Glennon each time.
Yes. That's a good point. Okay, so Kristen's our definition queen. So she gets to read the definition about imposter syndrome, and it's not what you might think. So, Kristen, take it away, my psychologic queen.
Here we go. So, imposter syndrome, a very specific form of intellectual self doubt, often accompanied by feelings of anxiety and depression. Imposter phenomenon occurs among high achievers who are unable to internalize and accept their success. They often attribute their accomplishments to luck rather than to ability and fear that others will eventually unmask them as a fraud. And you guys will be happy to know that I took my Invisalign out for this episode. Fully in preparation for that definition.
The lisp is like not nearly as noticeable as you think it is.
No, it does feel funny though. It feels like a permanent lip flip, but in my mouth.
Oh, I don't like the idea of that. No, 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 no.
Mhm.
But okay, so what about that definition stands out to you the most?
The imposter phenomenon occurs among high achievers who are unable to internalize and accept their success.
That was like a gut bomb to me when I read that
Mhm.
too. And especially when I hear that something rather than syndrome has a specific connotation to it, whereas phenomenon feels like it's medically observed and therefore more real. That's my perception of that. So hearing that actually it was first termed imposter phenomenon was a lot more validating that this is like maybe it's not a DSM-5 diagnosis. I'm pretty sure it's not, but like it's a real thing that has been documented and researched.
Mhm.
It's
Totally,
not
and
just
it's yeah, I was astounded. I think that was probably the thing that surprised me the most in researching it is that it's so like, in different medical journals, it's mentioned, like, not just
yeah,
psychological journals, but actual medical journals. It's interesting that that's why that was it's so widely recognized as something that is, like, all that affects our body in the same way that affects our psyche, and yeah, so interesting, but the idea of not being able to internalize and accept our success, I think, whew, that's a good one.
it is so true. And I mean, I also felt seen with the fact that with researching, the common theme that came up is that imposter syndrome goes hand in hand with perfectionism. And, you know, it, there is like this distinct difference, though, of somebody saying, well, of course, everybody feels nervous and wonders if they'll be good at something that they try that's new. But what is the difference between imposter syndrome and self doubt? So, what I found is that most people do experience self doubt when they're facing new challenges, but someone with imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, they have this all encompassing fear of being found out to not have what it takes. It's this underlying fear that you are a fraud and you don't deserve to have gotten where you have been and you are a fake. And that is so different from self doubt. Self doubt is more so worrying, am I good enough? And I think that that's what I thought the imposter syndrome and phenomenon were is like, am I good enough? I'm not sure. Oh, well, I'll get over it. It's almost like imposter phenomenon is like this wall that you can't get past because you're
Mhm.
so afraid that people will find out that you are a fraud. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you tell yourself something all the time or you tell someone else something all the time, it's bound to become true.
Totally, and I think what's interesting, like a differentiation between self-doubt and how I'm now understanding imposter syndrome, is that the perception of self-doubt is kind of like, okay, if I have a skill that I've yet to master and I'm having a reasonable amount of self-doubt, the natural progression of that is that I practice, I get better. Okay, now I've mastered that skill. There's this like progression that happens to mastery. When it comes to imposter syndrome, it almost feels like the more successful you get or the better you get at a skill, the worse it becomes because
Yep.
you've hit this next level and like there's still that inside shame, that inside like low self-worth that makes you feel like, okay, now my imposter syndrome is worse because I'm actually at this level of success, this level of mastery, but my insides are still low level, not good enough. And trying to bridge that gap is harder when the more successful you become.
Right, right, because you have more and more to lose.
Mhm. Mhm.
Totally.
Yes.
And I thought that I just threw this little bit of history in there because I think it's so interesting. So, imposter phenomenon was first found by women. A win by women once again. And so it was first described and documented in the 1970s. And at first, it was thought to only affect women, which is not untrue to this day because it more disproportionately women versus men. But I think that from my understanding, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, is that like men might experience it, but it's not as deep and all encompassing as how women experience it and their journey through imposter syndrome.
Well, yeah, because if you think about how men progress, their feelings of doubt, they usually get smaller as their work and their intelligence is validated over time. They're able to find role models who are like them, and rarely, if
Yeah.
ever, do others question their competence.
Mhm,
But women experience the opposite. Women are really rarely invited to the table in like big corporate settings, you know? And
mhm,
then you add in like maybe a woman of color, you add in people that are minorities in a workplace environment where they're not being invited to contribute in the same way, or women, for example, like if you're a hard worker or if you're competent and you're like straightforward, well, then you're a bitch. If you go on maternity leave, I guarantee you a man in most settings is not going to usually be asked, well, how do you plan to care for your children? What's your child care going to be like? You have that with women.
Sure.
Right. And then that's encouraging this disparity between men and women in the workplace. That's a whole other topic. But it
Totally.
is interesting to see how imposter syndrome has been a byproduct of a system to keep us small.
Totally. And I mean, it's just there's so much that can be said, but I truly feel like, especially the corporate world and the medical world were never made to have women be in them, thrive, and stay in them. I mean, it's just within recently that it's become illegal for employers to ask you about your family, your plans to have a family, if you're married, any of that. I mean, that's like kind of new in an interview that
Mhm.
they can't ask about that. That's fucked up.
Oh, totally.
And people wonder why we have imposter syndrome. Hello.
Right? Yeah, I mean, especially when you feel like that, like the feeling of getting found out. Like, I remember being at an interview for a job working in the ER and I was like 14 weeks pregnant. And I like didn't tell them I was pregnant until after I got hired. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, by the way.
I just think, like,
And
what a baddie. She's interviewing to be in the ED, all
oh
while
God.
pregnant and probably vomiting in between.
Well, but then I faked contractions every shift so that I could get out of work. So, and that's what I realized.
Queen. A queen.
Aesthetics might be the better route. Well, I
I'm
did labor
dead.
delivery first, but that feeling of getting found out, like, "Oh my god, I'm pregnant. Is this gonna jeopardize my job?" Like, I felt like there was a secret I was needing to keep, you know? But,
Mhm.
yeah, it's so fascinating. I do think it helps having a deeper understanding of the history of imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
I feel like helps take the shame out of it.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
It's like another like, "Oh, well, fuck the systems that we have in place." Like, that is not it isn't a reflection of me and my worth and my abilities. This is the system that's been set up to make us feel like we can't amount to what we obviously can.
Yeah, that's so true. It does take the shame out of that part of it, and I think that for that reason, that's why I'm hoping that this episode will be helpful to other people as it has been to us.
Yeah.
The other little factoid that they observed in the first round of research done with imposter phenomenon is that it disproportionately affects not only women, but also minority groups, including racial minorities, LGBTQ, and also it's predominantly observed in individuals who grew up in households with high achieving expectations. And I know that I personally can relate to that 100%. I definitely had tiger parents, for lack of better terms. And so I think that that's also where imposter syndrome, to my understanding, starts out. And I feel like that's also just healthcare workers in general. Very few people come from households where it was like the mediocre was okay. No, you have to be
Mhm.
exceptional to get into any specialty within healthcare, especially one as competitive as aesthetics. You have to be exceptional in some way or another.
That's so interesting because I had the opposite experience in my childhood. Like, my parents definitely wanted me to go to college and stuff, but it was all more about like, we'll choose a career so that when you can basically stay at home. You know, if you were a nurse, you can work per diem, you can work 3
Yeah.
shifts a week, that kind of thing. And so while yes, I did feel imposter syndrome for sure, I wouldn't even say I felt imposter syndrome when I was working like ER, labor and delivery. I felt like that was more like self-doubt and just genuinely more like, okay, I don't know what I don't know here. It's only been since starting in aesthetics and having my own practice that I really feel the imposter syndrome hard. And I think it's this feeling of like not so much the work itself, but the success of being a woman in business and the money that I'm making and
Yeah.
the control I have over my schedule and the fact that I'm single, I have kids, but like, how does that look like with being a mom? And that's where my imposter syndrome stems from.
Mhm.
So this has been really interesting, just diving in and seeing like, okay, where is this showing up in my career? And
Yeah.
How can I attack it so that it's going to not hold me back?
I'm glad you pointed out for you that it started with aesthetics because when I was researching, it seems like a lot. I can only speak like once again, this is a theme within our podcast, but we can only speak as far as nursing goes. So I was trying to look specifically into nursing research as much as I could. And a lot of people's imposter syndrome was documented and started as a new grad. I can tell you 100% I did not have imposter syndrome as a new grad nurse. I did not even have it when I started as in NP school. I didn't have imposter syndrome ever until I started in clinical. That's when my true imposter syndrome came through because it was a different role that expected so much of me. Whose cat ass is up there? Is that our girl Luna?
As Willow,
Oh, Willow came to show her booty twerking on a Saturday night.
her primordial pouch. Just,
I'm obsessed with her.
she's the best. She's so snuggly.
She is so snuggly, but she's not loyal like our Luna girl.
Yeah, although I think she sabotaged us, so I don't know how loyal she really is.
I don't know. I think she was just trying to show who was in charge because then she acted
Mm,
like a sweet little angel the last
that
time
is
we recorded.
true. That's true. She just wanted her belly rubbed the whole time.
She just wanted her belly rubbed. I kind of
I
understand
mean,
that.
I relate to that. So,
Totally. So the takeaway is that if your imposter syndrome didn't start when you were a new grad, that's also completely normal. The people that I have spoken to and Kristen confirming this, it it starts when you go into a completely unknown area where there's like very little, it's just unknown, like unknown territory, which is aesthetics. And then you've had these high expectations for yourself and suddenly you don't know how to fulfill them and you're like, I don't know how I got this far to be able to be trusted with people's faces and not fuck it up. That was really the like one of the turning points, but really the first one for me was being in clinical and being in NP school and realizing how much I had to know as a primary care NP and thinking not even it was beyond self-doubt. It was thinking I don't know how I got this far. How did I even get into this school? How did I didn't even show the potential. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I think that that's so interesting is that also in talking to my boyfriend, male feelings of self-doubt are very, very different from female feelings of
mm,
self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Um, Men will maybe feel when they start something new, they might feel a little bit like they're a fish out of water, like not a fish out of water. They might feel a little uncomfortable, but it's easier for men to get acclimated to something new because in society, I read this book a long time ago and it's kind of been canceled in cancel culture, but there were aspects of it that were really good. I will find the name of it, but it was like that book that got really popular about like women at the table, Cheryl something.
oh, Cheryl Strayed.
Yeah, no, no, no,
No, no, no,
Cheryl.
no. Sandberg. Sandberg served. I like it starts with S. It starts
Yes,
with
yes,
an S.
Sandberg or whatever it was. So that book kind of got canceled at one point. I saw it on TikTok, but there were parts and aspects of it that were on point. So one of the examples that she used is saying that women are designed to doubt themselves and play down their success, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about in reframing imposter syndrome and getting past it. But she said that she took a class in college with one of her friends who's female and then her brother. And for the final, the she and her friend, her female friend, were mulling over the things that they probably got wrong and how they didn't probably do well and they could have done better and just basically saying like, "Oh, I like this class was way too hard. What did we think we were getting ourselves into? There's no way." And then she asked her brother, "How do you think you did?" And he said, "Pretty sure I got an A." If a woman said that, people would be like, "What a cocky bitch." You know what I
Mhm,
mean? But for
mhm,
men, it's
mhm.
okay to like for men, it's like, I got an A. I
Yeah, and that's almost like the mark of masculinity is that like self-assuredness.
yeah, whereas this meek, timid, like, "Oh, I don't know if I should have this spot at the table in this calculus class." That's so
Mhm.
female. So really interesting. I'm sorry if anybody got offended that I quoted that book. I don't
It's lean
remember.
in.
Lean In, that's it. Yeah. I will say a man bought it for me. Isaiah bought it for me.
Why did it get canceled?
I think that people didn't like that she was, like, trying to instead of calling people out, call them in. People
Oh, but
didn't like
that's
that. I don't know.
mm,
Now I'm afraid of, like I've sparked a few controversies on TikTok, and Kendall told me that I need to start treading a little bit lighter. So I'm just, if you don't like Sheryl Sandberg, I'm sorry, but
Right.
that book had some fire content. So where does this come into healthcare? Um, Most of us, I think, have probably felt imposter syndrome, but how is this specific to healthcare? So healthcare is a culture that expects perfection with little room for error.
Mhm.
That alone is toxic and is a recipe for disaster. However, healthcare continues to attract people who seem to, especially if you're someone like me that came from a high achieving perfectionist household, that was like an attractive thing. Little room for error. I thrive under pressure. This is for me. So, therefore, high achiever is the predominant personality type. And I can tell you that is why most of the psychosocial problems that happen in nursing are because 90% of people are high achievers and nobody likes to,
Mhm.
and everybody wants to be the best. It's very toxic.
Totally, and then you have this, like, eat your young culture that comes in predominantly within nurses, and that doesn't help make it any better because you have people that are, like, ready to pounce on you when you do mess up, which then creates more anxiety about the feelings of inadequacy.
I would have given my left boob to have had Kristen as my preceptor as a new grad. It would have been so
You wouldn't have learned about
nurturing.
anything other than your feelings, so I'm not sure how great I would have been.
She would have been like, "Take your little hands, believe in yourself, and check that cervix."
That's right. That's right.
You have small hands.
No, I have huge hands. I thought we compared fingers before.
Have we? Oh, I have
I
tiny
feel like
little hands.
I know, I feel like we've compared, like, palm sizes. I have man hands.
And but how does that happen? Like, how does that change things in labor and delivery?
Oh, it means that, like, I can just really get up in there. Unless it's, like, a posterior cervix, then it's like, "Ooh, ooh,"
It's a
but,
hidden
I mean,
cervix. But hey,
very rarely have I had any issues.
but the thing that I didn't understand and didn't think about is that I always thought of imposter syndrome in its own isolated silo, but psychological research has shown that it has destructive effects on your well-being and your professional development. For example, if you do not believe you are worthy, you are not going to be the first person to step up and say, I want to be in charge of that council, or I will be the person to start that research. You will hold yourself back.
Totally.
And that to me I was like, "That's so sad. You're literally your own worst enemy with imposter syndrome."
Oh my gosh, and then the fact that when you're dealing with not only, like, just everything it takes to be in healthcare, the long shifts, weekends, nights,
Yes.
holidays, all that, you have that part of it, but then you have the, like, psychological, like, warfare that you're putting yourself through. The burnout rate with that is, like, freaking ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah,
that
it's
is
a recipe
huge.
for disaster is what it is.
Yes. Yes.
And so, not shockingly, imposter syndrome down the line is closely linked with burnout because if you expect so much of yourself I mean, I don't want to say you're setting yourself up for failure because really it's the system setting yourself up for failure and I don't want people to
Mhm.
feel like they did it to themselves, but it's inevitable, that tornado is just going to spin closer and closer and closer and pull you right up with it. So, part of me thinks after doing this research that one of the bigger reasons that people don't talk about that people leave healthcare is imposter syndrome
Mm, totally.
and not feeling good enough.
I think too, people in like nurses, like I think there's enough nurses that are burned out right now in like specialty fields in the hospital that are like considering coming to something like aesthetics or going to clinic jobs. But I think that there's a step before that. I think that like between working your ass off and being burned out, I think that there's a middle ground there. And I think that nurses are not encouraged enough to explore like what does light them on fire within nursing. They make it so hard to, like, go new to specialty or to,
Do a
like
shadow shift.
yeah.
They make it so difficult. That's so true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, nursing as a whole could just be so much better, but I think too, as we, like, now hone in on, like, aesthetics specifically, think about oh my gosh, I've been in aesthetics for years now, but I will never forget walking into an exam room my very first time by myself after being trained how to do Botox and filler and having to have a consult, like, recommend something, like, do the whole shebang. I will never forget that is such a vulnerable experience in a vulnerable time. I remember, like, I think I still get like this sometimes, but every time the phone would ring and I would hear like that a patient wanted a follow up or something like that, I felt like I was gonna shit my pants.
Anytime that I saw somebody book an appointment with me, I literally felt like I was gonna die. I was like,
Mm.
"Please don't book an appointment with me. I am
Please,
not your
please no show. Please no show.
I am not your girl." Oh my god, I know, I totally relate to that. The first patient that I had to do independently on my own Botox, I told her because one of the fun things about me, guys, is that if I am extremely nervous, shocked, like, emotional, my hands are extremely shaky. That is not a good trait for an injector. I have full chihuahua hands, like, straight up. So, luckily, it doesn't really affect me as an injector anymore, but when I was new, I had to have patients I would be like, "Okay, feel free to relax." I was like, "I'm just gonna get propped." And then once I was starting to inject, I'm like, "Okay, feel free to close your eyes," so they wouldn't see how shaky I was. I would have to, like, do some things to, like, get it kinetically out, and then I'd be fine. But if anybody saw me doing those kinetic weird things with my hands, they'd be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" So,
Oh my god, I can just picture you, like, in the corner of the room, like, doing some tai chi or something, like, get yourself ready.
I think
Your
my pa
patient's just sitting there.
I know, they're like, "What are you
Oh.
doing?" I know I had to "ooh-sa-sa" myself a lot. But early in your career, I think that part of it too, and we have talked about this with being new to aesthetics, if you go from being an expert in your field in the hospital or outpatient or wherever you are, and you switch into being new to aesthetics, that's a new experience for most people having a complete new to XYZ specialty. And that is prime time, vulnerable time to have imposter syndrome, especially with how competitive this field is and how hard it is to get in it and how often you are reminded of such.
Totally, and I think as you were talking, something came into my mind, like, I think that there is a difference between a reasonable amount of, like, cautiousness and
Yeah, like a
nervousness.
healthy amount.
Yes, because you're that's gonna stop you from doing something stupid, or it's going to make you, like, make reasonable choices with your patients, reduce your risk of complications. But there's a difference between that and an internal sense of, "I do not deserve to be here."
Right.
And, like, one you can work with, one is, I think, a little bit of a deeper dive.
Totally. Yeah. And it's on the topic though of like how it limits your like how imposter syndrome limits your career opportunities. I was talking about it in like my realm of understanding in like floor nursing and working in the hospital, working outpatient. But how does that look in how it affects your career opportunities? Because there can be a healthy amount of self doubt, like what Kristen was saying, but also, if imposter syndrome is pervasive enough, it will limit you from career opportunities because you don't see yourself as worthy or competent. So, one
Mhm,
of the biggest ones that I think that I mean, I can speak to personally is starting a business. Nobody ever thinks they're good enough. Like if you
mhm.
do right off the bat, you're likely to fail anyways. There's like that healthy balance, right? But people hold themselves back. And and that also with taking a promotion, maybe having a supervisor role, something along those lines, or becoming a trainer and being approached for that and thinking, oh, there's no way I'm knowledgeable enough. I haven't been doing this long enough. You will talk yourself down from it because of imposter syndrome when you very well may be worthy and the perception of you is very different from the exterior perception of you is very different from your own perception of yourself.
Totally, and I think what's unique to aesthetics compared to other forms of healthcare is that you not only have the actual, like, side of injecting, but you have the social media pressure.
Oh my God, the
Uh,
social media. I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't
yeah,
even think about that.
I mean,
Tell tell me more.
that's just a whole other layer. I know we have so many injector friends who are phenomenal injectors. They have a very loyal client base. They make they do hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales every month. But when you talk to them about their practice, one of the first things that they'll talk about is like, "Well, I'm terrible at social media.
Okay.
Well,
That's
I don't have very many followers." Whatever. And it's like, yeah, but like, to me, social media should just be like a means to the end, or like maybe a creative outlet. I'm like, you're literally doing the thing that everybody who's trying to get famous on social media is trying to do, yet you still feel inadequate because you don't have a certain number of followers.
and yeah, and then they harp on themselves. I know a couple people like this too. And I mean, then they really are hard on themselves because they feel like, okay, I'll finally feel legitimized when I get
Mhm.
to 2,000 followers or whatever. And really,
Mhm.
that's so arbitrary. Oh, that's infuriating.
I
especially
know.
when you're like, what, doing $200,000 a month in sales? Like, fuck
Right.
social media. Keep doing what
Right?
you're doing.
Because I think most of us who have, like, decent sized following know that those don't like, you could have 1,000,000 followers,
It may
but
not
that
correlate.
it does not necessarily correlate to paying clients, you know? But,
Right.
yeah, I think, aesthetics is different in that field. We need to do a whole social media episode
Oh,
too and
yeah. We
how it
absolutely have to.
affects
There's
us,
so much to say about
I
that.
know.
So, that being said, this is a prime aesthetics is prime territory to feel like you are not legitimate, you are not worthy, you don't have a seat at the table because of all of the pressures and the societal expectations around the fact that this is a very hard field to get into. Two, that people should or might be expected to act a certain way. Three, social media. I mean, it's really just the perfect storm.
Mhm.
Will say like what Chris and I've always said, this is my forever career. I will work in aesthetics until the day I die. Like I know I will, but there is something in the culture that is somewhat toxic if you really don't do it correctly and protect yourself. And I think that
Mhm.
that's social media is really what it comes down to.
Totally, totally. I think
So
that's a
Kristen,
great
what do
point.
we do? What do we do about imposter syndrome?
Oh, acknowledging it, I think is huge. I think recognizing, I mean, that's half the battle, right? I think acknowledging, I hope that after this episode, people can kind of like m- more easily identify that feeling of, I think we can all really pick out different points in our career where that feeling of imposter syndrome is so pervasive, where you're like, maybe going to a training or a conference or something, you're just like, "Oh my god, I am not good enough to be here."
Mhm.
And so I think acknowledging that that is a feeling that you feel, like, it doesn't have to lead to an action right away, but just acknowledging it and maybe noticing the patterns in which it arises is hugely important.
Yeah, and what triggers it?
Mhm.
Yeah, this is a little bit of like if you're a kinetic person like me and you like to put things to paper, it might be nice for people to have like a calendar of sorts. I used to in clinical prescribe people headache journals all the time and like a like a headache calendar to track so they
I
could
hate
see what the
those.
triggers was. I fucking love them. I feel like they were so helpful. It gives data.
As someone with that suffers from migraines, I've been given those on numerous occasions, and I literally just don't ever fill it out.
Honey, I'll fill it out for you. But anyways, having actual like objective data to say, okay, this is what triggers me and makes my imposter syndrome worse. Don't shy away from that. Go towards it and really
Mhm.
deep dive into it. Just, like don't shy away from opportunity because you feel like you are not worthy. That is really where you have to dive in deep and really get uncomfortable.
Totally.
And one of the things that I think is so interesting, Chris and I have talked about this before, is reframing your speech about yourself to therefore empower yourself. So, one of my favorites is that rather than assuming that you quote unquote got lucky for your success, recognize the work that you put in place to get to where you are. I'm guilty of this. People would say to me, like, it seems like you're doing like so well. And I'd be like, yeah, I'm really lucky I got into this field. No, I worked my ass off. And it's okay for
Mm.
you to say that. And what I like to say now is, I am very fortunate or I am very grateful. That's a good place to start. It's
Mm.
really uncomfortable to go there and say that about yourself. But being proud of where you are and your success, it's not cocky and it's not, and it doesn't make you seem anything other than authentic and really transparent and owning that you deserve to be where you are. And I think that there's
Totally.
nobody else looks bad. Nobody else thinks anything of that other than like, yeah, you are very fortunate. Subtle reframing, but very powerful.
Totally. I think another reframe that I have been trying to do in my life is that I am alleviating saying I'm sorry and changing it to thank you. So an example would be like in the workplace, it'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry I made that mistake." It creates this like one down position, like, "Oh, I'm sorry that I made that." I mean, of course, apologies have their place. I'm not saying not to apologize, but I think our go-to is like, "Oh, sorry I'm running late. Oh, sorry that I didn't put this filler in the cabinet correctly." But instead of saying like, "Wow, thank you for being patient with me as I ran behind a little today," or "Thank you for spending time with me to help me with my mistake." It especially when you're dealing with colleagues in the workplace, it takes you from this one down position of like, you're having to apologize to them because you made a mistake. And instead, you're staying on the same level as colleagues to say, thank you for helping me see my mistake and spending the time to help me correct it. That's something that it just helps you bring your power back a little bit.
I love that because it really does make everything nice and horizontal
Mhm.
rather than having this vertical power battle of I made a mistake, I'm sorry, it's my fault. And like it's
Mhm.
much easier to assume responsibility and make yourself the scapegoat because especially if you're used to that, you're like, that's comfortable. I can take the blame. That's no problem.
Totally. I was on a girls' trip not too long ago, and one of the girls was, like, sharing something and had gotten emotional, and she, like, was crying and kept saying, like, "Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, guys." And I, like, said that. I'm like, "Stop saying sorry. Like, just say thank you for being here with me." And, it was awkward at first for her to say that, but it takes your power back instead of feeling, like, helpless and like, "I'm sorry, guys. I'm a burden. I'm this." I'm like, oh." Instead it was like, no, like, thank you for just being here with me and just sitting with me and holding space for me.
Yeah. And isn't that interesting too? How reframing that and switching up the speech and how you like look at that, it also takes you away from the spiral of I'm so sorry, I'm not a good friend. I'm
Mhm.
ruining this time. It just really does put a pause to that.
That was our this is a Glennon thing, actually, so I guess Brene and Glennon have equal parts on our
Our
podcast today.
bitches. Our bitches. Okay.
I am manifesting trying to meet them.
Oh my God, I know. Can we get them on the pod?
Oh my god, I would die. I would literally pee myself. So I think another thing that is important when you're thinking about what imposter syndrome and how to combat that would be to observe your workplace and see if there is a culture of imposter syndrome that is actually encouraged amongst your coworkers, amongst your higher ups, your managers. And like for example, like if you don't feel like you have a voice within your work environment or if whole parts of your personality and your drive are villainized, that may also encourage feelings of imposter syndrome. But as always, guys, as I know we say this almost every episode, there is just like deeper work that needs to be done in this area because I really do feel like I don't know if Nicole and I've told you, but we go to the same therapist now. Shout out to
Yes.
Amy. She,
Amy,
oh,
sacred fucking journey.
we like,
She is my like if Brene Brown is your bitch, Amy is my
oh,
number one bitch.
yes, yes. Okay. Yeah. Amy, Brene Brown, Glennon. That's
That's our lineup.
that's my list.
Yeah, that's my
But
lineup.
But so much of what we do in therapy and we don't do therapy together, let me just clarify,
Yeah,
but
no couples therapy.
yeah,
We don't need that yet.
yes, but so much of what our therapy consists of is, like, recognizing that something like imposter syndrome comes up as a part of us that is trying to protect something deeper, and while we can't give you any, like, real advice on this, I will say that doing the deeper work of trying to understand why parts of me like have this imposter syndrome come up and like what it's trying to protect and where that all originated from has been super freaking helpful and more so than just okay let me thank you instead of sorry like those are great first steps but truly the deeper work is where you're going to see change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good thing to point out. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I've learned with imposter syndrome and perfectionism is that they are coping mechanisms that we come up with to protect ourselves and usually to try to heal, put a band aid over a wound. And if that's one thing that Amy has taught me, we have lots of wounds and there are core wounds that you experience. And so for me personally, my perfectionism was a coping mechanism and a way to feel that I'm in control. And the thought of prior to doing that deeper work, if somebody told me and said, well, you have imposter syndrome, partially because you're a perfectionist. Stop being a perfectionist. I'd be like, cool, that's my entire personality. I can't let go of my entire personality of being a perfectionist. Then all of this is going to fall apart.
Hmm.
But by doing the deeper work, you just learn that that's just a part of your personality. And it's
Yeah.
okay that that part of your personality doesn't have to work so hard. So, obviously, I'm not a therapist. Nobody would pay me if I was a therapist. Kristen's basically a therapist.
Oh no, I'm not.
Yeah, you did. You did all of the work to become a
I know.
therapist, basically.
I know.
She's my therapist. Everybody knows that. But I just can't plug therapy hard enough. But I think that
Mhm.
that's one of the other things is that within sometimes you don't know a workplace has this kind of culture or has this kind of attitude towards, especially towards women. I don't mean to seem too feminist, but especially towards women, where it's like one of the biggest examples within med spas is saying, well, you know how much worse it could be somewhere else? Do you know how good you have
Mm,
it here? And I mean, you don't realize until you're gone that you're like, wow, you were actually kind of gaslighting me a little bit. So
mhm,
just know that you're worthy. You're worthy of feeling empowered. You are worthy of feeling like you are successful and you've earned your place at the table. And even if you're not a high achiever, I think it is still possible to have imposter syndrome. I don't know.
mhm.
Kristen says she's not a high achiever, and I 100% disagree. She's a very high achiever
Well,
in her
on
own
so
way.
on the Enneagram, which is, like, another topic we'll talk about,
Oh, yeah, let's do an episode on that.
yeah, I do have a really strong week 3 wing, which is the achiever. So I do, like, have this achiever side of me, but where my imposter syndrome stems from really is not from perfectionism. It's more from a deep shame wound. And it's
Oh,
truly the feeling of walking into a room and feeling like I don't deserve to be here. That's why I think
got
that
it.
that line of not being able to internalize my
Yeah.
success, I think that's why it resonated so much with me.
Mhm.
A feeling of I don't deserve this
Right.
because of a deep shame that I have that Amy's helping me try to figure out.
Shocking to no one. I am a type 1 on the Enneagram, no wing, just a 1. Perfectionist, rule follower, confrontational. Like,
You might have a 2 wing though,
no,
like,
I
more
I
you're
think
you're relational.
I do, yeah, I'm not a complete dick, but the
You
wing
definitely don't have a 'cause, like, for those of you
I'm
who
not
don't
a
know,
9 wing.
I know,
Absolutely not.
that's very pacifist.
That's very peacekeeper. I'm not here to keep the
Mhm.
peace, man. I am here to keep keep the rules. Uh I will say that that has been one of the things that with starting a business that has been so hard. I feel like I am my own worst enemy with being a type 1 and being such a rule follower because there's lots of ways in business and getting started that you can bend the rules that's like not necessarily illegal but like kind of frowned upon but like lots of people do it. And you could save time, you could save money, but I absolutely refuse to do it that way because I just have such a stick up my ass about doing things the correct way.
I mean, I think your lawyer very much appreciates that,
She very much appreciates
and your
that.
medical director.
Both of them, man. They really do, but it makes me think, like, when it comes to imposter syndrome and saying, "Oh, there's no way I'm not smart enough, I'm not successful enough to start my own business," you look around and you see all the people that run small businesses, not just med spas, but, like, restaurants, things that have lots of things that are litigious, require labor codes, all of that, and if you look around, you say, "All of these people are doing it, like, why can't I?" That was kind of
Totally.
yeah, once you learn a little bit more about it, so I empower people always with entrepreneurial like, to be I don't think that people are born entrepreneurial necessarily. I think it is somewhat bred into you, and you realize that, and you groom that, and you cultivate that within yourself too.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
totally agree.
So Kristen is more of a perfectionist than she thinks she is. I will say she's a perfectionist when it comes to faces,
I'm a perfectionist when it
but
comes
not a toxic,
to
not a toxic perfectionist.
no, no, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to design. Like,
Yes,
I feel like
absolutely, 100%.
it's the same thing I get with when I look at faces. It's not about the like, is everything symmetrical and is this line gone and that. When I walk into a room and like the design is off, I can like feel it. Or when I moved, I was like trying to decorate. I'll decorate. I'm like, okay, that looks fine. But like, I could tell in my soul that it's like, just needs a couple more tweaks. And then once I like make those tweaks, it's like, okay, my soul can rest. And like, that's
It's
how I
almost
feel
feng
like
shui.
faces. Yeah.
It's feng shui of faces.
Facial feng shui. I know.
I think that also this is one of my many hot takes. I have found recently on social media that people will call themselves injectors will say, "I'm such a perfectionist, you're in great hands." When honestly you're not a perfectionist, you're a people pleaser and you just want them to
Mm.
be happy and you won't chill out until they decide they're happy. No, that's not being a perfectionist at
Oh,
all.
that's interesting.
Yeah, because people will say, I'm such a perfectionist. It needs to be exactly how I no, like there's never I think that there's a certain amount of need attention to detail. That's another thing that I've
Mm,
had to like pull out of my perfectionist persona that I've led myself with and people have like branded me as my whole life is that I have an attention to detail the same way that you have an attention to detail.
mhm.
But it's making sure that it's not dysfunctional. So guys, just put in the work, do some therapy.
You
Yeah,
want Eno's number? Let us know.
I know that I don't want her to get too
I know,
entrenched
that's
because I
true.
need her to be available to
This might be the one that we gatekeep.
we're gonna gatekeep Amy. I'm not ready to share her quite yet. Although she'll be in business forever because we're so fucked up.
We're like, I will literally keep her in business for ever and ever. Amen.
I'm so interested though, Kristen, like how do you feel like anybody in your family, because you have a family of healthcare workers, like,
Mhm.
do you feel like anybody is that like overachieving type A, like healthcare worker?
No,
Really?
my
That's so
my
healthy.
no, they all have pretty good work-life balance. My sister is a supervisor, but she, like, does it because it's a higher pay and she can, like, be out of the numbers more, but it's not because she's, like, trying to climb some ladder. And then my brother's been a paramedic for years and kind of the same thing, like, he works a lot, like, they're all really I would say that they're all much harder workers than I am, like, if I had to work the shifts that they work, I mean, and when I did, I complained the whole fucking time. They're like
But you
champ.
did it for so long.
Oh, yeah. When I was younger, my dad, he would work like 30 night shifts in a row. If they were like trying to save for something,
What?
his like coworker would go to Africa every year for a month. And so he would pick up all of his coworkers' shifts. They were
I'm dead.
opposite.
Absolutely
So
not.
he would work 30 night shifts in a row. And I'm like, I could never, even if I wanted to, I just literally, my body would give out. And so, yeah, but I would say I'm the most high achieving, like educationally, for sure, educationally, and just like drive in business, but they're all much harder workers than I am.
Isn't that interesting that
Mhm.
being an overachiever is not necessarily a hard worker?
No, another thing I'm trying to figure out in fucking therapy.
Because
I
there's
could
like,
be so much further ahead if I just didn't love naps so much.
you know what? There is nothing wrong with a nap, man.
I know.
I fucking love
I
napping.
love naps. They're
I
the
had nap
best.
trauma. I had nap trauma though, like PTSD napping for a long time after like I came off night shift. I like could not sleep during the
Oh,
daytime because it just took me back to the panic feeling of waking up and being like, "What time is it? Did I sleep enough? Did I sleep too much?" Now I love napping though. I'm past that.
that is the worst when you wake up and you're like, "God damn it." Like, oh,
I know. Yeah, seriously though, I could show you guys from maybe at one point we'll release this footage to our OnlyFans. Just kidding. But all of our animals have made cameos during this recording.
it's quite the treat because you got to
Quite the
both
deal.
my animals' butts.
Yes. Well, anyways, we actually didn't have full transparency. We had no sticky situations this week. So please send us your sticky situations because until then, we're going to keep talking about the Enneagram and our childhood traumas.
That's right. So save yourselves, save us.
If you want to hear us talk,
Sticky situations.
if you want to hear us talk about something other than our shame wounds, please send us your sticky situations. Anyways, okay.
Oh.
Until next time, guys, please attack that imposter syndrome and we'll be there cheering you on. Whoop, whoop. Whoop, whoop.